Welcome back, Heroes of the Horde and Adventures of the Alliance.
Damn! I guess you guys really like the Burning Crusade.
Yeah, that last one really popped off. When we last left our two guilds, they were marching alongside the Sons of Lothar, the founders of Durotar, and the scattered races of Outland as they battled their way through Zangarmarsh to clash with the fearsome Lady Vash, Illidan's only genuine supporter who was siphoning off the waters of Outland and keeping the Warden Maiev Shadowsong under lock and key in the newly relocated Warden's Cage. Two women from the War of the Ancients, in new roles and new forms, handmaiden turned sea witch and priestess turned warden, now clash on the shattered world of Outland. The opening chapters come to a close with the death of Lady Vash. Maiev, single-minded as ever, now sets her cold hatred upon the walls of the Black Temple.
The Burning Crusade. Patch raids!
Well, we work to tie up a few loose ends. First, some people brought up a decent point about the outpost of Sylvanar, which we removed from the Blade's Edge Mountain, being the implied remnants of Maiev's forces.
Although we could not find any records or proof of it.
I like that idea, so we're swapping them into the set of the Cenarian Thicket. Since we pulled a crop of Cenarian druids out into Netherstorm, and since we moved the Warden's Cage to Serpent Shrine, this should patch over fine. Next, I realized after the fact that we don't do a great job explaining that we were integrating the events of Shadowwing into our Hand of Gul'dan dungeon. In my mind, I did, but the video itself never really brought that up, and lucky me rolling a nat 20 on my performance, because that mistake actually lets us talk about the Warcraft manga as a whole right now.
Warcraft manga. As a weeb, I am confused.
Right. So, we've discussed the comics in a prior video on this channel, but at the time we merely alluded to the Warcraft manga, a baffling thing that exists. Arising from a collaboration between Blizzard and Tokyopop, a Japanese publishing company, written by old hand Richard A. Knack and drawn by Kim J. Han, these stories are the birthplace of the character Kalecgos and take the form of the Sunwell trilogy primarily, as well as the Shadowwing duology after the fact.
There's also a bunch of crazy stories from an anthology called Legends, and an unfinished series of class-themed comics that only got as far as Death Knight, Mage, and Shaman.
The stories are a lot of fun and establish some really iconic characters that embody the true scope of what the Warcraft setting is capable of. Honestly, rereading these comics for this video, I found myself overwhelmed and frustrated, not for lack of enjoyment, but because of how strongly I felt about each of the original characters in these works, and how I have no clue how I'm supposed to make them all relevant in this series. In the initial trilogy, there's of course Kalecgos, who goes on to serve a very central role in the stories of both dragons and mages going forward. But there's also Tyrigosa, a classic tsundere-esque character who is also a blue dragon, and at one time Kalecgos' intended mate, Jorad Mace, a disgraced paladin who once served under Arthas directly and now struggles to renew his honor and connection to the light. Darkon Drathir, a elven magister who once betrayed Quel'Thalas to the Scourge and now dresses like an elven Yakuza pimp. Hargan Grimstone, a homeless-looking dwarf dragon hunter seeking revenge for his destroyed family. The Forsaken Baron Valamir Mortis, who is embarrassingly similar to the Forsaken character that we came up with for our series. Trag High Mountain, a Tauren warrior who actually goes on to become a Death Knight in his own series within that Legends anthology he mentioned. And finally, most importantly of all, Envina Teague, a beautiful and kind-hearted girl who rescues Kalec from the brink of death and who accompanies him on a journey that reveals her to be not merely a girl and not merely a mage, but the remnants of the magical power of the Sunwell, scraped into a pile and then transfigured into a human girl by Crassus.
What? What's the point of that?
Hush, it's romantic, I guess. Kalec and Envina fall in love over the course of the Sunwell trilogy, which, once resolved, leads into the Shadowwing story, following Tyrigosa and Jorad into Outlands where they battle the last remaining Death Knights of the Old Horde, namely Ragnar Bloodreaver, and take special interest in the existence of Nether Dragons. Aside from the spurned Blue Princess and the Moody Paladin, this story treats us to the likes of Warith, the coolest design I have ever seen for a broken Draenei.
Who is killed?
Catavan, an ethereal engineer.
Who isn't killed?
And who will become relevant again when we start talking about introducing the Tinker class down the road.
Oh, no way, we're gonna do that?
Hell yeah. And finally, a pair of twin nether dragons, Volaku and Zeraku. It's these characters from Shadowwing that I'd like to circle back and tie up. Volaku and Zeraku in particular should have been present in the Hand of Gul'dan dungeon while the guild fights Zulahed. Tyrigosa, Jorid, and Warith can also be present, with the events playing out similarly to the comics just in different locations. The party can aid the three in the fight against Bloodreaver, and once defeated, his empty shell can be used to explain why Gorefiend returns in the form of an undead human instead of a resurrected undead orc.
Does that seem a bit convoluted and unnecessary?
Yeah.
Perfect! Let's do it.
So, Bloodreaver and Warwick are killed in the dungeon, and during the subsequent big showdown against Zulahed, Gorefiend's soul is resurrected into a new corpse. The two adolescent nether dragons then pursue the Death Knight to the Black Temple, where they all vanish.
Alright, so we'll deal with the Netherwing at Black Temple.
Yes, and with that cleaned up, we can begin our story with the last of our loose ends.
Draenei City!
The city of Shatrath. once the shining port capital of Draenei society.
And actually before that, it was the capital of the Ogre Empire, Goria, which was smote down to the bedrock by the elementals to punish the ogres for oppressing the orcs.
Now a decaying ruin, and particularly painful memory for the Draenei people. It was razed to the ground and its population slaughtered by the old horde during the genocide of the Draenei. And in the modern day, the ruins of Shattrath have been claimed by the Shatar, a council of Naru who arrived on Draenor to aid the Draenei in their time of need. From a gaming perspective, it was historic for being the first shared capital city, allowing for free access to a single non-combat territory between the Horde and the Alliance, outside of some of the smaller Goblin territories. In place of the traditional Horde-Alliance faction tension, we are treated to the Aldor and the Scryer faction tension, which is totally different from the Horde and the Alliance tension because
It's exactly the same, but you get to pick your side.
yeah, to be honest, it's a bit of a mystery as to why this was allowed. The Aldor, the ancient order of Draenei priests who worship the Naru directly and are led by High Priestess Ishana, are a faction ruled and consisting entirely of Draenei, which is to say, Alliance. While the Scryers, a blood elf cabal of royal mages and arcanists who defected from the Sun Fury and Illidari following the vision received by their leader, Vorenthal the Seer, is a wholly blood elf faction, which is to say, Horde. The arbitrary choice between these two is little more than a novelty and is almost never repeated. While the tension between the two factions is compelling, it is unclear why they were not locked to their inherent racial signatures, and ultimately it doesn't really matter. For the purposes of this story, the Ash Knights will align with the Aldor, while the Thunderslayers will align with the Scryers. The guild's arrival in Shattrath will be punctuated by the political struggles of the factions within the walls. While the city may have fallen out of fashion in retail WoW due to its graphical quality being locked somewhere around 2007, it's worth taking a moment to examine the city as the great, shattered mecca that it was always meant to be. Shattrath is split into 4 sections. The Terrace of Light at the center, where the Naru and all of their otherworldly power and beauty guide the citizens of Outland against the power of the Legion and the madness of the Betrayer, all the while making soothing jingle-jangle sounds because, I don't know, they're supposed to be God's wind chimes or whatever. The Aldor rise, a true cultural expression of Draenei theocracy, taking the form of a holy temple sitting at the highest part of the city, decorated with magic waterfalls and natural beauty. If one were to break down the different faiths devoted to the Holy Light, while Azeroth's side is emblematic of the Western Roman and Catholic churches, the Draenei are meant to evoke an older Abrahamic interpretation of the same faith. The High Priestess Ishana is unique in this regard. 1, because she's a female Draenei, which we almost never see in prominence. 2, because she serves as the leader of a religious political faction in a culture where their holy prophet is still active and alive. In effect, by doing as we have done and making Velen into a more passive presence, and by solidifying the Aldor into the Alliance, it allows the character of Ishana to emerge and take a more relevant place as the story goes forward. Similarly, the Scryer's Tier, a beautiful garden pavilion cultivated by the elves who refused to obey the orders of a prince who was descending into demonic madness. The Scryers are mages who, after pledging themselves to the Naru, have begun practicing divination magic by applying their arcane prowess to the study of the divine. They are not priests, but rather scholars, and while the centerpiece of Aldor's rise is their grand holy temple, the Scryers have devoted themselves to the creation of the grand library. The library itself is the vision of their leader, Vorenthal the Seer, an ancient elven mage gifted with foresight
In a more limited form than Velen.
who is interesting because he seems to be the only elf ever encountered in the game who is to be considered old. I know that sounds silly, and most people prefer not to think of the different lifespans of the various Warcraftian races, but given that the elves are capable of living for multiple millennia without showing significant signs of aging, an elderly elf is significantly noteworthy.
This is like the whole concept for Freerin, for all my weebs out there.
Most of the characters who encounter Vorenthal consider him to be somewhat frail, and he's even reported to be in rather poor health, which I think puts him in a unique position of being one of the oldest, air quotes, mortal beings from the Eastern Kingdoms. I don't know, I just love the image of this one old, hunched elf walking with a staff, having lived through the Troll Wars, the Arathi Empire, and even the First, Second, and Third Wars.
I bet this dude knows Meryl Winterstorm.
Yeah, I bet he does. Finally, in what I believe are implied to be the drained canals of the former ports, sits Shattrath's lower city. A patchwork mosaic shantytown consisting of all the refugees from all over Outlands who sought shelter in the Holy Mecca from the forces of the Legion and the Grand Betrayer. And speaking of the Betrayer, I think it's finally time for us to turn our eyes to the fallen temple of Karabor, where the Lord of Outland broods in his madness.
Wait a sec. Aren't you forgetting something?
No. We hit every zone, every dungeon, every raid. I mean, what else is there?
Damn it. PvP. The battleground. Eye of the Storm.
Oh, damn, I did forget about that. Alright, yeah, that's worth addressing. As we at one time spent an entire video discussing, the PvP battlegrounds are always some of the best content that Blizzard ever makes, but unfortunately, while the first 3, Warsong Gulch, Arathi Basin, and Alterac Valley,
Plus Ashara Crater and Tol Barad in our timeline,
had significant little touches added to them to make them feel integrated to the story and the world, these touches become fewer and far between as the expansions go on, and PvP becomes a pretty sharply divorced subject from the narrative and setting, as evidenced by a number of factors. The first signs of this drift begin right here. Eye of the Storm is the first battleground not to have an entrance located in the actual game world,
as would be the case for all battlegrounds after it.
literally separating it from the in-game physical space and from narrative consciousness. But it doesn't really stop there. Where WG had the Silverwing Sentinels and the Warsong Outriders, AB had the Defilers and the League of Arathor, and AV had the Frostwolves and the Stormpike, EOTS has nothing. So without a setting and without characters, it's pretty difficult for us to draw the conflict into the narrative.
Don't act all coy. You've already got a plan, and you've been teasing it for 2 pages.
Yeah, alright, fine. The clear answer here is the Aldor and the Scryer conflict. The fall of Lady Vosh brings about a pause in the operations of the Horde and the Alliance on Outland, and Illidan's vassals and lieutenants have either been killed or incapacitated, and while Maiev plots her strike in Zangamar Sylvanar, the Ash Knights and the Thunderslayers make their way to Shatrath. They're greeted by Khadgar, a member of the Sons of Lothar, but one who no longer considers himself to be solely loyal to the Alliance, and by Adal, the great Naru leader of the Shatar. After a tour of the city given by the true celebrity of Shatrath, Khadgar's servant, the guilds find themselves caught up in a rivalry between the two major factions. In-game, the political friction between the Aldor and the Scryers is often told and not shown. In fact, in practice, I don't recall it amounting to much more than a poisoned stew pot. For our purposes, the interim between patch 2.0 and 2.1 will create an interesting parallel power struggle between the Aldor and the Scryers as the two factions compete for the favor of the Naru, and take advantage of the growing power vacuum left behind by the fall of Illidan's lieutenants.
This could actually be how we tie in the open world PvP objectives for the Outland zones, which we also kind of ignored in the story.
Ooh, yeah, that works. That sends us on a reunion tour of the zones.
Attempting to establish base camps in Hellfire and the Shattered Hill, Overlook, and Stadium.
Harvesting the machinery and resources from the east and west beacons of Zangamarsh.
Falling back into the Ring and Circle of Blood, and now solely run by Gurgthok and Woden after the death of Gruul.
Attempting to either protect or siphon the lingering powers of Auchindoun through the 5 Spirit Towers.
Trying to make allies of the Kurenai and the Maghar by fighting for control of the waterfall village Halar.
Before finally landing forces on the nexus point of power in Netherstorm, the Eye of the Storm, and duking it out over a barren scrap of rock.
Battle Masters!
Right, Spymaster Thelodian and Magistrix Larina on the side of the Scryers, and Exarch Aurelius and Anchorite Karja on the side of the Aldor. The battle for the Eye of the Storm is chaotic and deadly. The guilds participate in the battle, and I think this would be where Nikoro and Tannen first meet one another, crossing blades in the chaos of the storming nether. However, at the height of the battle, both forces would be stopped in their tracks by the arrival of the Naru, Ziri. Not one of the original members of Adal's entourage, Ziri commands the two sides to lay down their arms and join him in Shadowmoon Valley, where he will put an end to the blasphemy of Illidan Stormrage once and for all.
Not bad for an opening quest line.
Not bad at all. The conflict lays the foundation for the army that now lays siege to Black Temple. For the Sanctum of Stars, Vorenthal leads the Scryers, and from the altar of the Shatar, Ishana leads the Aldor. Between the two sits Ziri, a beacon of light and justice ready to bring down the Lord of Outland so that he might answer for the suffering he's caused across the broken world. The armies will of course be joined by some of the field commanders from the Alliance and Horde set up in a former video. The Sons of Lothar, Daneth and Kurdran leading the Alliance auxiliary forces alongside Ishana, while Rokon and Samaral will come to the aid of Vorenthal. I kind of picture a number of initial siege-style quests taking place outside of Black Temple against Illidan's forces, but the splintered armies of the Aldor and the Scryers would make little headway fighting divided as they are, and it's around this time that Jorn and Magus would receive missives from Maiev Shadowsong. The guilds answer the call of the Warden,
And all of you guys too, don't forget, you're all in the guilds as well.
to a secret meeting arranged by the Elder Sage Akama. With Vosh dead and Kael incapacitated, Akama remains the last member of Illidan's inner circle. While Maiev threatens the broken Krokul, he explains his motivations for pledging his service to the betrayer. Though twisted beyond recognition by the fell red pox of the old horde and cut off from the holy light he so revered, Akama had desired only one thing for all of these years: the return of the temple of Karabor to his people. More specifically, to him. When the Legion had come, he fought against Magtheridon for control of Karabor. He joined with Illidan for the sole purpose of liberating its sacred halls. Yet when Magtheridon was captured, not only did the betrayer not return the temple, he continued the blasphemous perversions of the Pit Lord, and even deepened the corruption. The gleaming temple of Karabor was no more. Its darkened halls forever stand as the Black Temple. When Akama spoke out against the corruption of his people's holiest site, Illidan seized the fraction of his soul and bent him to his will. Now, Akama cares little for his own forsaken soul, but the soul of his temple, for Karabor, Akama would now see the betrayal of the betrayer, and the death of the Lord of Outland. Maiev is reluctant to trust the broken Akama, but in the end her hatred wins out, and a bargain is made. Akama will open the way, and Maiev will lead a strike force inside the temple to join with Akama's forces and kill Illidan Stormrage.
Part 2, the Black Temple.
Who doesn't remember this raid? Though we had walked the blighted halls of Naxxramas and braved the horrors in the depths of Encourage, What is it about Black Temple that makes it feel so truly unholy, as though you've made yourself unclean simply by stepping on the stones within? Black Temple takes you on a tour through every blasphemous ritual that the Betrayer has ever perpetrated in his war against the Legion, all the while treating us to a series of bespoke boss fights scraped together from the remnants of his lost vassal's forces. The knights and the slayers accompany Maiev through the entrance created by Akama, which leads them directly into the sewers of Karabor, where they fight the remnants of the Coilfang Naga and their de facto commander, High Warlord Nagentis, while wading through the muck and slurry of the corrupted waters. Around this point, Maiev would elect to split from the party in order to locate Akama, while the guilds push forward into the Illidari training grounds. You get a view of the forces of the Shatar fighting to breach the gate behind you, and I'd actually like to take this encounter in this area, which is otherwise lacking in lore significance,
Though not in cool factor.
to resolve some plot points from Shadowwing. As the guilds step from the sewers, it becomes apparent that the Netherwing have turned coat and sworn themselves to the Betrayer, meaning that now the training yard has been given over to serve as their roost. As parties battle the Illidari ground forces, the incorporeal Nether Dragons begin to assault them from the skies. Yet as more and more of the Nether Drakes are slain, a ritual, cast by an unseen hand, begins to cause their energies to coalesce into a single form. A towering, colossal infernal, fueled by the ambient magics of the Nether Dragon. Supremus. As it grows in scale, even the undefeated Nether Dragons are drawn into it, including the likes of Neltharaku, the sire of the Nether Dragon flight. Towards the end of the encounter, Tiragosa, accompanied by Jorad and Mordanaku, son of Neltharaku, prince of the flight, arrive and attempt to save as much of the misguided fledglings as they possibly can. To Tiri, the Nether Drakes are not but misguided children, and her spell manages to free around 24 or so, including Valaku and Zeraku. However, the pull of Supremus is too strong, and Valaku chooses to sacrifice himself for the rest of his flight to escape into Tiragosa's portal.
Where did they go?
Oh, we'll deal with that in Wrath. Back to the fight!
Okay.
Die, Supremus!
And die he does. With the gates now open, the forces of the Shatar flood into the temple yard, and even the gigantic Abyssal falls. The guilds press forward. Inside the temple proper, the party is met with a torrent of demons and satyrs, once beholden to the Legion and Kil'jaeden, now bent to the Betrayer's will. Within the refractory, the guilds encounter Akama, locked in a struggle against a shard of his own soul held hostage by the Master's twisted magic. With great effort, the shade of Akama is defeated, and the Elder Sage casts his own rituals to make himself whole once again. The guilds next face off with Gurtog Bloodboil, the latest and greatest innovation in Fell Orc Fell-forged monstrosities, who has been left guarding what can only be described as the most horrifying feature within the Black Temple, the Shrine of Lost Souls. I find it so chilling that even to this day, it's entirely unclear what this thing was meant to be. I've heard theories that it was a font of power Illidan planned to use to help cure the Blood Elves, or that it was a receptacle for Illidan's final vial from the Well of Eternity. But at best, it could be described as an amalgamation of souls smashed together into a Fullmetal Alchemist Philosopher's Stone-styled agony, which is so viscerally disturbing it is best left unexplained. Now, similar to Hakar, I do have my own plans for this explanation, but at this exact moment, it's best left unsaid. Before the guilds can ascend to the higher levels of the temple, they find themselves chilled by the presence of a dark consciousness observing their progress. Atop Gorfiend's vigil, they are greeted by a quiet, contemplative Terran Gorfiend. He screams no battle cry, offers no curses. He merely speaks, even as the party cuts into his flesh.
I was the first, you know. For me, the wheel of death has spun many times. So much time has passed. I have a lot of catching up to do.
And upon his death, only notes calmly,
The wheel spins again.
Ugh, spooky. Let's move on.
Death really isn't so bad.
Yeah, agreed. With the Death Knight once more slain, the guilds, alongside Akama, race to ascend the levels of the temple, charging straight into Illidan's personal sex dungeon,
Now we're talking!
and battle their way through a literal orgy in the Den of Mortal Delights. The further up they go, the more the Blood Elf influence on the temple begins to shine. The party is met at the end of the den by Mother Shahraz, leader of the Illidari Shavara.
And potentially all of the Shavara? Question mark.
Right? This wasn't really telegraphed at the time in BC, but around the time of Legion, it was implied that the entire demonic race of the Shavara had defected from the Legion and joined Illidan. I've seen them go back and forth on this a little bit, whereas here there's around 4 or 5 Shavara.
And at least one more in Magister's Terrace.
By the time we see them again in the Illidari starting zone,
Which is, canonically, chronologically, also happening right now.
he's got the entire race locked down, and there really don't seem to be any left in the Legion's ranks. I don't know, no real relevance to this conversation, but just thought it was kind of cool that Illidan was that persuasive that an entire race of demons defected from the Legion and now fight to save the cosmos. Anyway, where were we? Right, close to the top of the temple, we at last run into the remnants of the Illidari Sun Fury, who have evidently become the favored of the betrayer. The final representatives of the remnants of Illidan's forces, the Sun Fury Council, stands between the guilds and the summit of the temple.
Yeah, this was originally called the Illidari Council, but we'd argue that the Illidari are best embodied as a mosaic, and since the group is entirely Sindori, this name fits better.
At long last, the Ash Knights and the Thunderslayers arrive at the top of the temple. In the original raid, there's a door that cannot be opened without the aid of two of Akama's fellow Broken. This scene can remain, however, I'd like to modify it just slightly, and in lieu of the two admittedly random Broken shaman, I'd like for the figures who come to Akama's aid to be the souls of the other Council of Exarchs. Hatari, Maladar, Naeli, and in the absence of the traitor Sokrathar, Restalan, all appear to Akama, for two purposes: to establish some small spirit magic in the old rogue,
This will matter later.
and to remind him that he is not merely broken, Krokul, but that he is also Draenei, and that the souls of his people are with him. As the elder sage climbs the stairs, he arrives at the summit where his former master waits. The monstrous demonic form of Illidan Stormrage, the betrayer and lord of Outland, sits hunched, gazing into the hollow eyes of the skull of Gul'dan, beneath the scarred and sundered skies, showing the image of our own world, Azeroth, seen clearly from atop the temple through the depths of the Nether. Stormrage mocks Akama for his duplicity, and he falls upon the heroes in a fury of fellfire and a flash of his warglaives. The allies of the Shatar are felled. The betrayer is forced into the skies, calling upon the flames of the demon Azanoth to fight against the mortals. And in the blaze, Akama is incapacitated. With victory within his grasp, he taunts his attackers, wondering aloud if this is truly all the fury they can muster, only to be struck from behind by the glaive of Maiev Shadowsong.
Eat hula hoop sword. Yeah.
The Ash Knights and the Thunderslayers are renewed, and they begin their assault alongside the Warden once more. And as hatred clashes with madness, madness gives way, and the Lord of Outland is finally slain. With his final breath, he berates the short-sighted mortals, and Maiev specifically, insisting that her hatred and fixation has consumed her. That classic line, "The huntress is nothing without the hunt, and Maiev will be nothing without him." As the fallen Stormrage dies, the Warden realizes suddenly and coldly that he was right. She feels nothing in her victory. Her life's work is complete, and she has sacrificed everything to achieve it. Now she has nothing to return to. And she's not the only one. Akama, too, now with his temple returned to him, reflects on the final messages from the souls of the fallen Exarchs. He decides to leave the temple behind, as the halls no longer mean to him what they once did. The story of the Burning Crusade, up to now, has been a story of the fall of Illidan Stormrage. And in a single patch update, that story and the story of Outland as a whole is done. And now our narrative is empty, much like Maiev. What do we have left? The story kinda stumbles from here. The war against Illidan is over, but the Burning Legion still presses the Dark Portal, though it honestly seems to be mostly just to keep up appearances, and not at all a priority for the Alliance or the Horde. The realms of Outland and Azeroth are forever connected now, and their people can travel to and fro as they deem necessary. Kael'thas and Akama are both still incapacitated, but I expect they'd be regaining their lucidity, and I can imagine a few stay-and-while and listens between them and their respective leaders of the Shatrath factions. Kael'thas, upon regaining his consciousness, himself in the care of Vorinthal, and the very elves who abandoned him in his descent into madness. The two would be in for a bit of an awkward moment, but I expect the conversation could also turn to a reflection of the definition of loyalty. Does a true retainer give only what his lord has asked for, or does he give him what is needed? While Akama and Ashana would perhaps have a more cordial yet distant discussion about the path for their people. Ashana and her devotion to the Naru and her people's ancient priesthood might have trouble with Akama's more grounded, practical view of the world, but they'll likely agree on the big picture. If we stick with the Holy Light as an analogy of Eastern faith, if Ishana is a Hierophant and Velen is a Holy Prophet, Akama feels very much like Hassan, or the Old Man on the Mountain, if you catch my meaning. But whatever the discussions are that are to be had, they must take place in the grand celebration in Shatrath. The betrayer now lies defeated, once and for all, never to return. Ever. No, really.
So, do you think we need to address the retcon?
Ha! Which one?
Well, the Mardoon mission, Illidan's body, etc.
Ah, right. The benefit of hindsight, which is definitely not a burden. Alright, well, it should be noted that canonically, while we were raiding the temple and yanking on Illidan's ponytail, The first half of the Demon Hunter starting scenario was taking place on the Burning Legion prison world of Mardoom. In the Legion expansion, the Demon Hunter hero class finally became playable. However, since it was intrinsically tied to Illidan, they had to get a little creative with the timeline. And so it's around this time that I'd like to remind all of you of our missing guildie, Theta Saberfang, formerly Priestess of Elune, now sworn Demon Hunter of the Illidari.
Explain yourself.
Ever since the destruction of Nordrasil atop Mount Hyjal, Theta allowed her fear of the Legion to fester in her heart. It challenged her faith, it infected her dreams, and as the dark portal reopened and the masters of the Legion once more made themselves known, Theta made a choice. To learn the ways of the Illidari from the betrayer by taking a demon into herself, searing the eyes from her skull, and vowing to sacrifice anything if it meant the downfall of the Burning Legion. The Illidari canonically returned from Mardoom right after we depart from the top of the temple, leaving Illidan's body behind. Since this is a little cheeky to begin with, I don't really feel guilty about taking our own cheeky spin on it and making it so that Theta returns from Mardoom with the others, but chooses not to charge the wardens and ducks out the back, in order to escape being imprisoned with her allies.
Nani? How'd she get away?
Shadow meld.
Damn.
Fair.
I think Theta would have seen the value and even the necessity of what Illidan was planning, but I also think she would have been more of a mind with Altruis in how she regarded the actions of the betrayer. As a result, she did not feel compelled to avenge him. While the rest of the Illidari are captured, she slips away, and it doesn't take long before she's reunited with the Ash Knights.
Hold up. Are you seriously just going to make one of the PC characters a demon hunter? 5 whole expansions before they were canonically introduced to the story?
Yes.
I don't know, that kind of feels wrong.
Well, if it helps, the dev team actually did originally have plans to add the Demon Hunter class in TBC. They just weren't sure how to make it mechanically different from the classes they already had with the technology they had available at the time. Aside from this, it's not really that much of a narrative change. Characters like Altruis or Lorimus Thalipides have existed in the game before Legion, and so have many others. Demon Hunters have been around in the World of Warcraft. They're just exceedingly rare. And now, there's one more of them running around with the Ash Knights. Alright, think about it like this instead. We said from the start we were going to be running this like a D&D campaign, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Alright, well, what's the number one rule of D&D?
Oh, I know this one. Get as drunk or high as you possibly can while still being able to do basic math.
Okay, right. What's the number 2 rule of D&D?
Rule of cool should always trump rules as written.
That's right.
Yeah. Alright, I'm sold. But you know what has to happen now? A legendary quest line for the Warglaives of Azeroth.
You're damn right it does. While Illidan's body was taken by the Wardens and the rest of the Demon Hunters were captured using magical bullshit on their demon blood or whatever, the Warglaives were left behind, embedded in the floor of the temple, seemingly bereft of the flames that had once filled them. After a few moments' reflection, after the Wardens clear out, Theta decides to take them for herself, taking one in her main hand, then one in her offhand, and feeling, nothing for the time being.
You know what? Scrap that. Let's do this instead. For $59.99 each, you can buy both Warglaives from the shop.
Nonsense! Adventure! As has been a tradition so far, these legendary weapon quests will involve our crafter characters, in this case Bandis Forgefire, who will accompany Theta on her quest to reignite her fallen master's twin blades. And actually, since we have Shatrath available, maybe Shakazan can come along too. In my mind, I see the two of them traveling to the shanty towns of Shatrath's lower city, striking deals with unsavory types for information on binding demonic power, bartering with the likes of the Ethereals, the Ogre Magi, and specifically the shadowy Arakoa cultists, all of whom will aid in the creation of a battery of sorts before the true quest really begins. After all, what better way to empower the legendary weapons of a demon hunter than by hunting demons? The demon Azeroth, a horrifying, fiery terror guard, would have made his move at the moment of Illidan's death, at last escaping his bindings and retreating into Outlands to gather his strength. Theta would stalk the demon, tracking him all the way to the throne of Kil'jaeden.
Right where Kazak would have been if we hadn't made better use of him in vanilla.
And using the battery forged by Bandis, she would rebind the demon within her twin blades, claiming his power for her own, and becoming the third of our characters to earn their legendary weapons. When the Knights asked Zhang if he wanted to continue traveling with them and become a permanent member of the Ash Knights, he gave them all a huge bear hug, get it, said, "Nope," and then sat down and drank himself to sleep. He was gone the next morning when everyone else woke up. With that cleared up, the Ash Knights returned to the Griffin's Gamble with their newly horned, blindfolded companion back in tow, and the Horde returned to Red Roar. They arrived just in time for the parade being held in the honor of the returning heroes. In passing, it's worth noting that while the Alliance and the Horde have both brought home new allies, among them are the likes of Garrosh Hellscream and Maya of Shadowsong, who will serve as important tension points in the story going forward. It's critical to keep characters like this around, as without these strong personalities to clash internally and externally, the narrative loses a lot of its ability to create compelling conflict.
Garrosh tension I get, but what do you mean about Maev?
Don't stress too much about it right now. All will be revealed in time.
Part 3. The Scales of Time.
Scales of time. Scales of time. Scales of time.
What, did you think we forgot about it? Well, since Outland went and blew its load in the first round of patches, we needed a way to bridge the gap between here and the Thalassian shenanigans you all know are coming. The Caverns of Time were originally a dungeon complex released alongside TBC's launch patch, in the same manner and style as the others that came with it. The only complication is that this dungeon is located on Azeroth and it takes place entirely divorced from the main story.
Not dissimilar to Karazhan in that way.
So we decided to take the complex and make it its own little segment of the story, vanilla patch style, meaning it just sort of rolls around and off we go. The Caverns of Time is probably one of my favorite storytelling devices in World of Warcraft, because it allowed the developers an avenue to grant us windows into past historical events or events from previous games, and experience them in the medium of WoW, and from the perspective of our own characters, without having to break the fourth wall like they do with, say, Keystones or Chromie Time. Maybe a month or so after returning to Azeroth, the guilds would be contacted by our old friend Ishradormi, who would summon the two guilds to the Caverns of Time, where we choose to more prominently introduce a major player in the franchise, the Bronze Dragon Krenormu, more affectionately known as Chromie. Chromie would have canonically first appeared in Andor Hall, and that can still be true, but I think she'd be the perfect character to introduce us to the new Evergreen dungeon complex, the Caverns of Time. Personally, I never understood why they drew a line under this at the end of Cataclysm. Maybe to try and stop doing dragon stuff, but that's not really a good enough reason in my book.
Who the hell wants less dragons in their fantasy game? Plus, they failed.
Our plan for the Caverns is to touch upon them briefly during each expansion, until we decide we don't want to anymore. If you think about it, the current retail mechanic of lore walking serves this purpose by allowing for an in-universe reason to refresh on relevant history. This version is just slightly more hands-on, actually putting you in the driver's seat of the content. To that end, the Infinite Dragonflight will need to be beefed up a bit. No longer will they solely represent a rogue force of dragons, but the true shape of corrupted order. They'll feature a greater variety of enemies, all twisted by that same infinite energy that covers the fallen bronze dragons.
Although their nature as bronze dragons isn't revealed until later on.
In our cosmology video, we established that order magic, most fully embodied by the Titans, should feel like an analogy for real-world alchemy. Unlike other magics, it should feel mathematical, almost geometric, and as time is little more than a numerical concept created to organize the fourth dimension of reality for three-dimensional beings, it slots quite naturally into this sphere. Conversely, the concept of infinity is one that is inherently unorderable. It cannot be quantified or qualified by definition, yet is a concept we have only because of mathematical need for variables. The infinites represent this corruption of order, just as the Emerald Nightmare does for life. For the purposes of today's story, Chromie explains that certain anomalies calling themselves the Infinite have begun meddling with the timeways, attempting to alter the course of Azeroth's history. This puts them in direct controversion with the charge of the Bronze Dragonflight. In due course, the Bronze Dragons empower the Knights and the Slayers to travel the timeways, making portals within the caverns to particular points of disturbance.
And because, of course, we're us, we beefed up the points of disturbance to 5, rather than the original 3.
The Slayers are first sent to Old Hillsbrad, where they are tasked with aiding a young thrall in his escape from Durnhold Keep. The Infinites kidnap Teresa Foxton, Thrall's childhood friend, to prevent her from aiding in the young orc's escape. The Slayers, disguised by the magic of the Bronze Flight, aid the future warchief in his jailbreak and rescue his old friend, though it is commented on that her grisly fate is ultimately still sealed. At the same time, the Knights are sent to the Black Morass at the site of the Dark Portal just before it will be opened for the very first time. The Infinites then send wave upon wave against the Guardian Medivh in an attempt to stop his ritual and prevent the summoning of the Horde and the destruction of Stormwind. The two parties return and reflect on the nature of the Infinites. And though their methods would unravel time as we know it, it must be admitted that their direct goals appear almost benevolent. Short-sighted attempts at preventing future tragedies, the death of an innocent woman who may have been destined to become a heroine in her own right, the destruction of Stormwind and the First War as a whole, all attempts to avoid pain, even if that pain would ultimately lead to the salvation of the world. The reflections are cut short by the emergence of two more disturbances.
These are our new ones.
The Thunder Slayers are sent this time to the shores of Kalimdor during the Third War, standing beside the legendary Grom Hellscream before yet another pool of Manaroth's blood. While he foolishly plunges into corruption, the forces of Cenarius arrive to purge the orcs from the sacred forest, and the Infinite Dragonflight arrive to reinforce the demigod. This is a fight I always felt was a bit anticlimactic in Warcraft 3 proper. It's a monumental moment that serves as the long-standing foundation for the enmity between the orcs and the Kaldori, but there's no cutscene or even a death rattle from Cenarius himself, and it always felt like it needed a bit more weight, so we added some here to give it more gravity. The Thunder Slayers will battle alongside the chaos-mad Grom and eventually put an end to the Lord of the Forest and his unseen infinite allies. Likewise, the Ash Knights arrive alongside the Scarlet Crusade and the legendary Ashbringer, Alexandros Mograine, and his son, Renault Mograine. It becomes apparent that this is the moment in time where Renault originally betrayed his father in an attempt to claim the Ashbringer for himself.
We made one small change. Canonically, this stabbing takes place in Stratholme. We're going to move it to the ruins of Anderhall. 1, because Chromie originally always hung out there, and 2, because it needs to feel different from the culling of Stratholme that's coming later on. And it's got like crazy time vortexes and stuff.
The Infinites reveal themselves in this dungeon amidst the agents of the Scourge and make every attempt to assassinate Reynault. It's up to the Ash Knights to keep him alive until he at last plunges his blade into the back of his father, depriving the world of one of its greatest champions. Concept for this dungeon came about after a number of y'all pointed out we wouldn't be able to tell the story of Reynault's betrayal since we removed the dead-end quest line of the corrupted Ashbringer, which was a valid point. But given the fragmented nature of that story and the story of the Mograines as a whole, there wasn't really a solid opportunity to bring it up and keep the continuity that we've established. Until now. Plus, it's a cool opportunity to show the Scarlet Crusade actually doing their job for once.
Before the murder, anyhow.
The two guilds return again to the Caverns of Time, again confounded by the actions of their enemies. Ishra Dormy would get the opportunity to explain,
as a player voice, since this theory was one that was always propagated on the forums,
The cruel duality of time. While the scars of the past may be hard to bear, ultimately it forges us into who we must be in order to meet the trials of the future.
This point strikes a chord in the minds and hearts of all of our heroes. After all, one does not take up adventuring if one's life is going smoothly. But in short order,
get it?
Chromie appears once more to warn of a final incursion. The Infinites have now set their sights on the Battle of Mount Hyjal, and they must be stopped. This raid has always been a little more rule of cool excuse to relive the climax of Reign of Chaos, and I've got little interest in changing that. However, I'd love the opportunity to make it feel more like the desperate retreat it was meant to be in Warcraft 3. I think it'd be sick to add encroaching Archimonde here, similar to Arthas in Halls of Reflection, and the corruption of Mount Hyjal building as he himself moves along the path. The guilds begin at the Alliance base camp, aiding Jaina and holding back the Scourge and the lower demons of the Burning Legion. The Knights will take on the Lich, Rage, Winterchill, while the Slayers will take on the Dreadlord and Etherian. But as Archimonde appears on the horizon, we are forced to abandon the Alliance camp before we're overwhelmed by the Scourge. At the Horde base, the Legion is thicker, and the party must aid the Warchief Thrall in the defeat of the Doomlord Khazra Ghaul and the Pitlord Asgalor. I think by rights, the Slayers would have dibs on any Pitlords they encounter, leaving the Doomlord to the Knights. But once more, the Lord of the Legion appears at the gates, and Thrall hucks his hammer at him, as he is known to do, then books it, and we follow suit, abandoning the Horde fortress. Finally, at the summit, the two parties join with the High Priestess Tyrande Whisperwind in preparing for the final stand. And it's here where we make our only real substantive change to this raid. Because this whole thing is frickin' awesome, most people fail to remember the framing device that brought us to time travel to this point, the Infinite Dragonflight. In the BC raid, it's completely void of the spooky dragons, but we'd like to add a touch of their involvement here at the summit. A circle of infinites hosting a ritual just beyond the Night Elf stronghold, a ritual that will prevent the rallying of the wisps and the destruction of the World Tree Nordrassil. The Knights and the Slayers will put an end to the ritual, but its effects will be felt. Archimonde is now at the tree, which means something else must slow him down. The Knights of the Lost Ashes and the Thunderlord Militia now turn and face one of the two lords of the Burning Legion, and battle him themselves to prevent the victory of the demons and the destabilization of the true timeline. They succeed, and he falls, just as he was destined to, but the thread of the infinite escapes into the haze of time. As the party return to the caverns, they are greeted not only by Chromie and Ishri, but also Sori Dormi, the consort to Norz Dormu, who will thank the guilds and also offhandedly reveal that the Timeless One has been absent of late, and that the Bronze have been unable to divine where or when he might be located. This is more of a layup for later issues, but it's important to mention here too.
Okay, yeah. So we saved Marty McFly's mom and invented rock and roll. What's next?
Trolls.
Trolls?
Trolls.
Trolls?
Trolls.
Trolls! Stop that.
Diamani never die.
Part 4. The Gods of Zulaman.
If memory serves, is around the last official time this will happen, but the patch 2.2 Gods of Zulaman update was the final, and now for something completely different that became the hallmark of Vanilla's updates. With the threat of Outland
and the troubles of the past
now dealt with, Blizzard needed a way to wrap up the expansion with a bang. This moment wasn't quite it, but it managed to refocus us towards where that finale would be, Quel'Thalas, and off to the side, Zulaman. A raid patch that focused on the new tribal empire of trolls called the Amani, which were different from the Gurubashi because they were called something else. Kid, really. The history of the Amani is actually a bit richer than the Gurubashi in that they had actually been present in the stories of Warcraft 1 and 2. The Amani are the trolls that best embody the enmity that exists between elf and troll races. They are the long-standing enemies of the Blood Elves, and unlike the Gurubashi, they actually joined the Old Horde during the Second War under the leadership of their great warlord, Zul Jin. Which is the real kicker here, since no matter which way you slice it, and no matter how deep the history of the Amani might be, at the end of the day, this patch is entirely about one troll. In fact, the first troll. Zul'jin. And herein lies my quandary. In the original timeline, Zul'jin was captured during the Second War after the orcs abandoned the siege of Quel'Thalas to hunt down Gul'dan. He was tortured by the elves, who cut out his eye, and he then cut off his own arm to escape his captivity. Then he did nothing for years, until this exact moment, where he makes a grand speech in the trailer, still does nothing until we show up, raid his house for Bud Nedrek.
Bud Nedrek. No, that's really his actual name.
Then boom, no more money. This is a travesty of sloppy writing on multiple levels, but most specifically in how it handles Zul'jin. Burning Crusade, for whatever reason, seemed to treat the Horde roster of heroes from Warcraft 2 as its personal hit list, which could be excused in most cases, to be fair. The Horde in Warcraft 2, now known as the Old Horde, was a lot more traditionally villainous than the one we know today. The roster holds names like Kargath, Cho'Gall, Gul'dan, Gorefiend, Deathwing, Dentarg.
Who?
Go watch the second video. These characters could never level out with Thrall's new philosophy, so in a lot of ways, they had to go. But it still doesn't change the fact that it kind of feels like Zul'jin caught a stray here for no reason. I've said before that my favorite Warcraft book is Tides of Darkness, and it was in that book that I really got to explore the character of Zul'jin. Even back then, as an Alliance shill, this dude was just cool. Sprinting through the upper tree branches in the forest, face covered by a scarf, dual-wielding twin axes. He felt like a woodland assassin, and it has inspired numerous characters in my own works. Killing him here in this one-off patch feels like such an incredible waste, but I can't really think of a way to reconcile it. The Alliance got to reclaim their legends from the Valley of Heroes via the Sons of Lothar.
Well, just 3 out of 5 for now.
But the Horde roster for Warcraft 2 was almost exclusively dungeon fodder. I wanted to save Zul'jin like we saved Kael'thas, but I couldn't think of a way to do it cleanly, not without changing his whole personality, to the point that he really wouldn't still be Zul'jin. The patch can't happen without him. There's not a single other character of substance in the raid. He's centrally defined by his hatred of elves, and with the Blood Elves joining the Horde, it would make no sense for him to simply bow his head and join his mortal enemies.
Kind of like how it makes no sense that the Blood Elves would ally themselves with the orcs in the first place.
Yeah, kinda. I seriously racked my brain for an alternative here. I considered an Amani rebellion led by the Hex Lord Malakras. I considered just leaving him as is, killing him, and then making up for it in Shadowlands.
That's Blizzard talk. Shame on you.
Maybe my favorite idea involved finding a way for Zul'jin to become the version of himself that Thrall encountered in the cancelled Warcraft adventure game, where he ran a rundown pawn shop on an orc reservation. But none of those ideas really work. At least, not right now. The patch has to happen. It can't happen without Zul'jin, and that means Zul'jin must be our enemy. We must fight and defeat him within Zolaman. I really can't change how this starts, but I can change where it ends. First, we're going to smudge the timeline a little bit. I think it would be important for Zul'jin to have been a captive until recently, until someone or something freed him from the dungeons of Quel'Thalas. Something delivered the knife into his hand. Perhaps he was meant to assassinate one of his jailers, cause a panic. But they underestimated the warlord's tenacity. He severed his own arm and fled the dungeons of Quel'Thalas. During his escape, he learned that the Horde was now present in Silvermoon as welcome guests, which would only stoke the flames of his hatred, and he would return to Zulaman and rally his downtrodden people to war.
But Zul'jin no fool.
No, he is not. So he appears before his people's religious leader, Hexlord Malakras, the medium between the Amani and the Loa, and asks for a way to empower their people to fight against the elves, and against the Horde, and against any other forces that might stand against them. Tragically, what no one realized is that Malakras was a backwards record-playing, Kool-Aid drinking, rubs the lotion on its skin, Kirei Kotomine psychopath. He proposed that the Amani take the Loa they had worshipped for centuries, bind them, for all intents and purposes kill them, and then channel their powers into their strongest warriors. Zul'jin, driven mad by his hatred of the elves and possibly also sepsis, agrees, and he leads his people on a hunt through the troll lands, binding the 4 strongest Loa of the Amani, Akilzon the eagle, Nalarak the bear,
Amani Warbear Mount. Yeah, I have that one.
Halazi the lynx,
My favorite of the jungle cats.
and Janalai the dragonhawk,
What the is that thing?
to the bodies of his strongest warriors. The ritual overwrites their minds, their personalities, and even their flesh. They are transformed into facsimiles of the Loa, cursed hybrids of troll and beast.
Hold the phone. This feels druidy.
Shut up, it's a surprise. Zul'jin himself awaits at the top of the now cursed city, planning his wars, while Malakras takes the powers of the darkest Loa for himself.
Ooh, who's that?
I don't know, that's all the patch says.
So who's the darkest Amani Loa?
We have no idea, even to this...
Is it the Isle of the Fangs thing from Midnight?
Yes, obviously it's the Isle of Fangs thing. Moving on. Anyway, all of the Loa shenanigans create a disturbance in the live stream or whatever, and it's actually the Night Elves who catch wind of it first, with the Blood Elf and Farstrider scouts discovering it not far after with good old-fashioned recon. This is probably the best example of forced parody we'll see thus far in the story, since the Alliance, by right of either territory or personal history, have really no right to be here. For the Horde, the raiding party will be led by Lorthamar Theron, and I think it makes equal sense for Vol'jin to be here as the primary troll point of contact for the Horde.
Plus, names rhyme. Am I right?
Yes, indeed. I'd also like to add in a character out of pure selfish fanboyism who has absolutely no reason to be involved, the Baron Valimar Mortis, a dashing Forsaken who was presumably,
And canonically,
killed in the manga for being evil and crazy. I'd like to bring him out now as a prominent member of the Forsaken who maybe got his head cleared by that avalanche in order to give us more undead characters in our toolbox as time goes on. You know, besides the Banshee and the Creep.
Tale as old as time, song as old as rock.
Nope, that's copyrighted probably. Moving on. Anyhow, given the proximity of Lordaeron to the mounting Amani threat, it's not the most nonsensical idea to have a representative of the Forsaken here. What is the most nonsensical idea is that under the same fanboy logic, the Alliance side is going to have Hargan Grimstone, the mad lad dwarf dragon hunter who's probably the closest thing Warcraft has to a troll hunter from the Warhammer franchise. No good explanation for this. He's a manga character, he's cool, I like him. He's probably treasure hunting or something, who cares? Maybe he got hired by Brawl Baremantle as a guide since he knows the region, and Brawl would be here investigating the fallen wild gods, and Daneth Trollbane. Yeah, that tracks. Stormguard's probably always down for fighting the Amani.
maybe he brings back the League of Arathor from the Highland.
Ooh, nice. Solid recovery. The Farstriders and the League of Arathor both respond to the disturbing reports of Zul'Aman, as do the Ash Knights and the Thunderslayers.
Troll back to the Throw Wars.
I think the Knights would take a right at the entrance and battle with the Bear and the Dragonhawk, while the Horde would take a left to hunt down the Eagle and the Lynx. Of special note this time, in contrast to the original story, as the avatars of the Loa are defeated, the spirits of the slain Loa will not appear as Jedi Force ghosts, but rather whisper to the party, and as the Loa fall, a dense fog begins to descend upon the city, growing thicker and thicker while the whispers grow louder and louder. The parties converge on Hexlord Malakras, who has channeled a dark power long forgotten in Zul'Aman. The mist would keep its distance from him, as though disgusted by his presence in his temple. He is brought down by the parties and his rituals are silenced. However, he uses the power of the shadows to evade capture, leaving alone the hate-filled, half-mad warlord, down an eye and an arm, but still more than a match for over a dozen mortal blades. Between the might of the knights and the slayers, his old nemesis Lorthamar Theron, and the descendants of his ancient enemy the Trollbanes, he is at last brought down. In the face of his defeat, he finally snaps. He curses the elves, he curses the Horde, he curses all those who would stand against the Amani, and finally, he curses the Loa, whose stolen power was not enough to bring him victory. But at this last oath, the fog begins to stir, the whispers turn to music, and Zul'Aman is filled with chanting, a song from the other side. The mists that had enveloped the troll city, it grows thicker and moves as though alive. It envelops the troll warlord, and as it does, his stream of curses swiftly turns into cries of agony, and then finally to silence. When the mist clears, the body of the warlord is nowhere to be found, and Brawl Baremantle will cryptically note that the wilds often see fit to take matters into their own hands. This cliffhanger is unfortunately the best I can do here for now. Take comfort in the fact that I'm not done with Zul'Jin just yet, and that his fate will be deeply intertwined with that of the Loa. But for now, just keep the faith, and hopefully, the result will be satisfyingly cataclysmic.
Wait, hold up. You said someone released him from a dungeon, right? You made that change specifically? Who was it?
Right. Well, I guess it's finally time to reveal who we're replacing Kel'Thas with in the final patch, eh?
Part 5, Fury of the Sunwell.
I know it will probably feel like we're bending over backwards to rewrite a story without the Sun Prince as the villain, but overall it actually makes it cleaner if you can divorce yourself from what's been familiar for so long. For one, the Prince's revival from his cold, dead, lootable corpse has long been the subject of memes, laughing at the fact that his death was, per his own words, just a setback, and even Blizzard got in on the joke. But, jokes notwithstanding, it still doesn't make a lot of sense, either logically or narratively, for the Prince of a Kingdom who was previously responsible for destroying their magic well to return to his kingdom and try to undestroy his magic well to make a doorway for his new demon daddy. The character to take his place will require a level of narrative gravitas, powerful magic in their own right, and most importantly, ties to the Burning Legion.
Oh yeah, pad out that runtime.
Alright, fine. It's Terran Gorfiend.
But we killed him too.
Yeah, but for him, death is just another turn of the wheel.
Oh.
You will show the proper respect!
Alright, carry on. How's he connected to the Legion?
Well, before he was a Death Knight, he was a warlock. Notably, a member of the Shadow Council. And actually, if we look at the Shadow Council, there are about 3 dudes who mattered at all. Gul'dan himself, famously killed for betraying the Burning Legion. Cho'Gall, who gets somewhat rebranded by his new record label. And Tarangor, warlock in life, and Death Knight in, well, death. I like the idea that this patch might be the last stand of the Shadow Council, led by the first Death Knight and serving as an echo of both invasions of Quel'Thalas, Gul'dan and his creation from the Second War, and Arthas through a professional connection as a Death Knight from the Third War.
Okay, so this would be triggering some kind of super PTSD for, like, all of Silvermoon.
I admit, I like the symbolism of ending this patch with a Death Knight marching on Quel'Thalas to claim the Sunwell, keeping the memory of a certain other Prince and Death Knight alive as the shadow of wrath starts to creep over the horizon. The twisted, broken corpse of Terran Gorefiend marches once more upon the kingdom of the elves, this time leading an army of demons for the Burning Legion. At his side are two more familiar faces. First, as was guessed by some of you, Darkan Drathir, the Scourge Trader of Silvermoon, fresh off his defeat at the hands of Lady Tanin in the Belf starting zone, the Ghostlands, who has allied himself with Gorefiend in the hopes of once more capturing Envina Teague.
We'll get to that.
And second, less famously, the Eridar Soronis, counterpart to Darkan Drathir, who has once more donned her Blood Elven guise as the leader of the Sunhawks, to allow us to include a sizable chunk of the Blood Elves in the opposing side of the war and keep the flavor of the supremacists or separatists under the Sunhawk banner. There's even something that could be done here along the lines of the inverted Silver Covenant concept. The Horde must have been a tough pill to swallow for a large section of the Blood Elf population. Those who didn't end up joining the Silver Covenant can have their stories explored here.
The Death Knight, backed by the Elf Lich and the Demon Sorceress. We got our villains. Well, what about our heroes?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked.
Of course you are. You wrote the script.
Shut up. Let's talk about the Shattered Sun Offensive. It's a lost art, those final patch factions bringing together all the faces from the expansion for one final climactic battle. The Shattered Sun Offensive is formally a tentative union between the Aldor and the Scryers in a much more complete way than the ones that sieged the Black Temple. Both factions have departed their terraces in Shatrath and arrived in Quel'Danas to battle the Legion. The Scryers are here, notably to defend their homeland, but the Aldor are here in an effort to rescue the tortured Naru, Ma'uru.
Ooh, that is gonna be awkward.
Yeah, I did say we'd get to this eventually. So upon the initial release of the Burning Crusade, for whatever reason, Blizzard felt they had to justify themselves in allowing access to the previously faction-locked classes, Paladin and Shaman, to the opposing faction. For the Draenei and the Shamans, we get the concept of the Broken, or the Krokul, devolved Draenei who were forced to embrace Orcish shamanism after being rejected by the Light. We discussed them a bit in the last video. For the Blood Elves, however, Blizzard created the notion of the Blood Knights, an order of Sin'dorei who, in seeking alternative forms of arcane power to sate their hunger, captured and imprisoned the Naru Ma'uru from Tempest Keep and harnessed its divine light for their own use, effectively making them paladin vampires, which is pretty metal, but
this really doesn't feel like a heroic or inspiring backstory, does it?
not really. I couldn't say whether they thought this idea sounded cool without really thinking it through, or if late-stage redemption was always the plan, but the decision more or less colors a third of the story, so it's worth bringing up here to set the tone for the conflict. In the same spirit of justification for unlocking classes, in order to give more meat to the concepts, we were given two personifying characters in the form of Nabundo, the first of the Krokul Shamans, and Liadrin, the Blood Knight Matriarch. I've always felt these two should have a kind of parity between them, as they feel similar to the pairings like Thessarian or Koltira Deathweaver. I only bring that up since Liadrin kind of got her big break in the Midnight trailer. I don't object to her prominence, but I do feel bad leaving Nabundo behind.
He got to do stuff in Kata with Thrall.
Yeah, but it's not framed the same, and you all know it. Anyway, aside from the Aldor, the Scryers, the Blood Knights, and the Kurenai.
Excuse me, the what?
Oh yeah, Nabundo had no formal organization, so I took the one from Nagrand and made it a shaman faction for him. Don't think too hard about it. It's not that important.
Got it. Who else is showing up?
Well, obviously this is the time to wake up our new racial leaders. Kael'thas has a definitive right to be here since it is his backyard, and I think Akama would arrive as a sort of secret service type for the Prophet Velen, who does have a major role to play in the greater narrative around the time that we're swatting old KJ. I'm sure plenty of you can envision the stay a while and listens that might take place between Kael'thas and Akama in the map rooms of the Shattered Sun, chatting up the different paths they took while under the leadership of Illidan. This would be the two leaders' debut moment in game, since prior to this they would have been locked as raid encounters. It gives them a chance to stretch their legs, and for us to get to know them as established faction identities for the first time. Lastly, we do have to talk about Kalek and Envina. At the conclusion of the Sunwell Trilogy manga, it is revealed that Envina was not a human at all, but the remnants of arcane energies of the Sunwell, transmogrified into a small girl by the Red Dragon wizard Crassus. Getting past how much sense that doesn't make, Kaligos, our intrepid young blue dragon, with a thing for hot magical blondes, solidarity brother, has pledged to safeguard her alongside the Rangers of Quel'Thalas. This matters because, for Gorefiend, Envina is the entire MacGuffin that the Legion is after in order to make this invasion properly happen. One of the reasons Legion invasions are always unsuccessful is that they can never successfully field their strongest units. Archimonde, Kil'jaeden, Manaroth, and Sargeras all require a special level of summoning magic to enter into our plane, and the ritual to create those portals requires powerful fonts of arcane magic. The Well of Eternity was famously utilized to this effect during the War of the Ancients, and as an avatar of the Sunwell, Anvina herself is literally a remnant of the power of the Well of Eternity.
But the Well of Eternity was actually a wound created by the Titans, removing one of the old gods and accidentally wounding Azeroth in the process. So, does that mean Anvina is...
Whoop, hold that thought. Big world soul questions can wait for another time. Instead, let's distract you with talk of our modified cosmology chart.
No, please, anything but the cosmology!
What's awkward about our new system is that all 8 of our spheres had some kind of greater entity associated with them beyond their mortal practitioners, except for the arcane. Life has druids, but beyond that were the Loa and the spirits of the dream. Chaos had the shamans, but beyond them were the elemental lords and even the incarnates if you look off into the distance. Order has titans, Fel has the Legion, Void has the old gods, but Arcane has nothing but mages. So we had to get a little creative. I don't want to add any of my own content to WoW, that's not the point of this series, and I don't want to shoehorn in some mythical arcaniacs into the setting and try to leave my own brand on a series that is rightfully not mine. It wouldn't feel right to do so. So keeping in mind the definition of the arcane, I looked into creatures throughout the story who might be considered mysterious or ineffable, who are now or have traditionally been unexplainable. Hakar the Soulflayer, the Reliquary of Souls, the Manta from Crassus's mysterious origin story, singular mythical figures and or creatures that are nebulous in origin by design. At the moment, I'm calling them the Eldritch, which is not a name I'm married to, and as ever, feel free to give me better suggestions in the comments. Not a group or a faction, and not really united in any real way, simply a classification of beings that are more magic than mortal, and that can provide a more tangible presence in the sphere of arcane. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but this is the sort of thing that strengthens the concept spheres don't have agendas, individuals do, that I am so adamant about when it comes to the cosmology in our timeline. Bringing it back to the here and now, Anvina, a being of pure arcane power, would also be considered an Eldritch, perhaps the first new one born in millennia. This wouldn't be put to words in the story so much, but it might spawn a few interesting or enigmatic comments by the Grand Magister Ramath.
Oh, last thing. Alar the Phoenix God, eternal companion of Prince Kael'thas. He's one too, and since we spared Kael'thas, he'll be at the prince's side during this conflict and beyond.
The forces of Terran Gorfin and the Legion strike fast, using the distraction created by Zul'jin and the Amani to claim the Isle of Quel'Danas and to begin reforming the Sunwell. Gorfin leads the host and directs their actions while Darkhan kidnaps Anvina and Saronis begins the process of finally siphoning off the whole of Muru's divine energy. Answering the call from both Verothen and Ishana, Prince Kael'thas returns to his homeland to save his people, while Akama takes his first steps on Azerothian soil to rescue the Naru and fulfill the prophecy given to him by the Prophet Velen. They are joined by Kaligos and another ally from the Blue Dragonflight, Madragosa, who came to assist him. When the Ash Knights and the Thunder Slayers arrive, it is these commanders who lead the charge against the Legion. As I imagine has become somewhat formulaic for us by now, we're adding in a second 5-man dungeon in the Isle for the narrative purpose of splitting up the two guilds before bringing them back together for the final raid. The Ash Knights will be deployed on the Shattered Sun's flagship and will be battling against the Sunhawk Blockade, a new naval battle style dungeon that will evoke the iconic daily quest where you're sent flying on Dragonhawks to burn the sails of the ships in the harbor. The dungeons will take place on the decks of the Blood Oath, the Dawn Chaser, and the Sin Loren, as the knights battle the captains of those ships and perhaps even a few stray Naga here and there, in order to clear the way for the Shattered Sun forces to land on the beachhead. This is where I'd like the players to defeat Saronis again, alongside her elite Sunhawk guards. I feel like she would arrive on the deck of the flagship after the party succeeds in sinking the 3 enemy ships. Saronis would attempt to sunder our vessel by channeling the shadowy magics of Muru, giving us our first glimpse of the fallen Naru, only for the attack to be foiled at the last second via a barrier erected by the Blue Dragon Madragosa, who would also strip away Saronis' Blood Elf disguise. With her demonic form revealed, and with the aid of the Great Blue, she would be slain on the deck of the Shattered Sun flagship and then tossed into the sea. And as the knights lead the charge into Elf Normandy, the Thunderslayers will be deployed on a covert strike mission behind enemy lines into Magister's Terrace. A route we considered taking for this dungeon was simply making it a 1-to-1 swap of Kael'thas for Gorfind, but after a little consideration it made more sense for the final boss of this dungeon to now be Darkhan Drathir. For one, he was actually a Magister, and 2, it's the first time the players are introduced to Kaligos, who has a shared history with the traitor. The dungeon would proceed as you otherwise remember it. Selen Fireheart, Vexalis, the priestess Delrissa and her varied henchmen, all echoes of the Illidari in many ways. I think along the way in this dungeon, a quest will trigger in one of the rooms of the terrace, a treasure room of sorts, and among the grand magical artifacts should be the legendary bow, Thoradal, the Star's Fury. It will be picked up here by the fourth of our characters to finally wield a legendary weapon, Kel Stonebull.
Since he's the only one who uses a bow.
The legendary quest line can take place later outside the instance. I imagine the bow of Dathomar Sunstarter himself would be heavily enchanted, and as such would have several layers of magical seals placed upon it that would limit its full power to those who are not worthy to wield it. Kel and Shakazan, with maybe the odd hand here or there from Bandit, can journey to several key locations of interest across Quel'Danas to unlock the seals as the battle moves forward. But back in the here and now, the Thunderslayers emerge from the treasure room onto the grassy balcony and get to enjoy the Scryer's Orb cutscene showing Anvina poised to be sacrificed above the Sunwell. Kaligos lands and introduces himself here before immediately flying off in a rush to save his beloved. But the Thunderslayers would be left to deal with the Elf Lich. Lady Tenin, once herself a member of the Convocation of Silvermoon, would come face to face with her one-time peer and famous traitor in the Magister's Asylum. He too is slain and the parties reconvene at the gates of the Sunwell Plateau, new enchanted bow in hand, ready to charge headfirst into the den of the Legion. The battle at the gates of Sunwell Plateau will be bloody, and as they push through, the guilds are confronted by none other than Kaligos, now possessed by the Dreadlord Sathravar, and ranting in his rabid madness, of finally being free of Malagos, and himself becoming the master of magic. The parties are forced to take him down and successfully purge the demon from within his body. Kalik then joins the forces of the Shattered Sun as they push further into Sunwell Plateau. In the ruins of Dreadscar, they meet their next foe, the mutilated Pit Lord Brutalis, and as they approach, Madragosa approaches by air and warns the party off. She attempts to confront and slay the demon commander herself, only to be slain instead for her efforts. In the process of her death, she has the flesh stripped from her bones, and her corpse reanimated as the undead worm, Felmist.
Damn it, Blizzard. They really cannot stop dunking on the blues, can they?
Yeah, that's gonna get worse before it gets better. Anyway, the guilds rush to avenge noble Madragosa and slay the Pit Lord and put to rest the fallen blue by destroying Felmist and then continuing to climb into the grand affixes of the radiant Sunwell Gardens. The last to confront them before they reach the Sunwell main terrace are the twin consorts, a pair of Minari Iridar sisters high in the hierarchy of the Burning Legion's Minari. The Grand Warlock Alithes and the Lady Sakralash bar the party from proceeding, and for their troubles they too are slain and banished back to the Nether by the Shattered Sun offensive. Finally, the party finds himself within the illustrious Terrace of the Sun, heart of Sunwell Plateau, and the location of the titular Sunwell before its destruction. They enter first the Eclipse Chamber and are greeted by the eerily silent, hanging stillness of the darkness that is the fallen Naru Mu'uru. This fight rightfully should be led by the elven side of the conflict. Kael'thas would arrive alongside Lady Leandrin and be forced to directly face the consequences of their people's rabid, insatiable hunger for magic. It led them to this, to the mutilation of the divine, and now, as they battle the Dark Naru, their guilt looms heavy in their mind. The powers of the void compound, and the being called Mu'uru is lost, replaced by the creature Entropius. The mutation stands to break the might and the spirits of the Blood Knights. But at this stage, Kael'thas will summon Alar, give a speech on changing the past and securing his people's new path forward towards the future. The Blood Elves push back, and the shadows are defeated. But the Sindorai should feel heavy here, guilty, and even dirty. Their sins are not washed clean, but the suffering of the Naru is finally ended. Proceeding through the Shrine of the Eclipse, down the spiraling ramp, at the very bottom between the Sunwell and the silken curtains, should be Gorfiend, once more standing vigil. He'll say very little, but he will mock the heroes, assuring them that there is no way to truly be rid of him. This fight, I think, should narratively belong to Akama, as he is both a former comrade of Gorfiend and tentatively versed in the magics of death.
Ashtung Deathsworn, yeehaw!
The battle should be twofold. First in the physical realm with the Corpse Knight before them, and then after Akama, perhaps aided by Nabundo, communing with the shamanistic elements of spirit and decay, would ritualistically shackle the mangled soul of the Orc Warlock within the Death Knight, forcing it from the corpse shell and allowing the party to confront and slay the sundered soul once and for all. The left hand of the Shadow Council will never rise again.
Yeah, probably.
But with this, his last true death rattle, he laughs and gives all that remains of his power to open the portal. The vestiges of the Sunwell's power, siphoned from Anvina, who hangs suspended above the Sunwell.
She actually has a fully unique model. Not that anyone can really see it.
And augmented by the life force of both Mu'uru and Gorfiend, opens a rift into the twisting nether, and from it, the demon lord Kil'jaeden emerges.
Well, maybe from the waist up.
Before the Shattered Sun now looms one of the two lords of the Burning Legion, and the only one who still remains active in his schemes. He declares he shall succeed where Archimonde failed, leaving him the last true lord of the Burning Legion henceforth. And even Sargeras will bow before him. Kaligos will be the narrative anchor in this fight, as he shields the party from the Demon Lord's advances and tries desperately to reach Anvina. Eventually, it's just too much. The party is overwhelmed. But just when all hope seems lost, Envina will stir. She shatters her bindings and begins to blast the Demon Lord with pure arcane force. She assaults him with all that she has and creates an opening for the party to strike. The Demon Lord is sucked back through his portal, leaving behind only a broken necklace. And as the chaos of the battle clears and the vortex of magical energy subsides, not a single trace of Envina Teague remains. Kaligos mourns the loss of his love, noting that not many would remember her name, but that all of Azeroth owes her their lives and freedom. The quiet, contemplative moment is swiftly joined by the rest of the Shattered Sun offensive. Kael'thas, Akama, Nabundo, Liadrin, Ishana, Vorithal, Lorthamar, Marad, Halduran, Ramul, Ramath, and most surprisingly of all, the Prophet, Velen himself. Unusually lucid by the standards of our rewritten timeline, he declares that the heroes have saved countless worlds from the flames of the Legion, and that his wayward brother, Kil'jaeden, will need years to recover from this defeat. He turns then to the wilted countenance of the Blood Elf forces, and announces for all to hear that the sins of the Sin'dorei have been forgiven by the light, and that the Naru, Ma'uru, had sacrificed himself willingly, choosing to endure torture and pain, knowing that with his final death, the noble race of the elves might finally be redeemed. It is Liadrin who speaks first, the original architect of Muru's downfall, noting that they are unworthy of forgiveness. But Velen shows her the dark spark of Muru and exposes it to the power of the Sunwell. In that moment, something unusual occurs. The darkness is purged, the light renewed, and the Sunwell is reborn. No longer a font of arcane energy, but of glorious, radiant light. The Blood Elves all remark at the new sensation, that ache that had been ever present within them, the hunger that had haunted them since Arthas marched upon their home, was gone. Their race had found salvation in the light, and in this moment the Sin'dorei are redeemed. This brings an end to the Burning Crusade.
The expansion called the Burning Crusade anyways.
The Shattered Sun offensive is dissolved. The Blood Elves are healed of their magical addiction through the light of the Naru, and the Draenei have at last found a safe refuge to call home, beyond the reach of the relentless Kil'jaeden. The Draenei return to Azure Mist. The great prophet, having overexerted himself in the traveling to the Sunwell, remains asleep for the whole journey, and the rest of his people, who once feared and rejected the Krokul, now follow the lead of Akama, who is anointed by Velen himself as his hand in these turbulent times. He acknowledges Akama's doubts, that he has spent too long within the shadows, but he also reassures him that a shadow cannot be cast without the light to give it shape. Whereas the Blood Elves assemble within their city of Silvermoon, now a holy city, and prepare to celebrate the return of their savior, the wayward prince, Kael'thas Sunstrider. There are talks of a coronation at first, but Kael'thas will once more give the famous line that Anasterion will forever be the last king of Quel'Thalas, and decide that Kael'thas will forever bear the title of Prince. The Knights of the Lost Ashes make their way home to the Griffin's Gambit Lodge, their own wayward friend in tow, changed but not lost, while the Thunderlord militia at last return to the Red Roar Den, and celebrate in true Horde fashion by getting absolutely hammered and taking turns firing off magic arrows from Stonebull's new elf bow. The demonic threats that began with the death of Kazak at the heights of Karazhan has now, finally, drawn to a close. We all know the demons will return and that there's more for the fiery green fiends to offer us, but for today, we've come to our end. I've decided I'm done making promises about speeding this series up. These videos take a surprising amount of effort on our part, and as our lives grow more hectic and, well, I can't really make promises on timelines. I promise that they'll happen, I just can't exactly promise when. I'm not actually a bronze dragon after all. Part of me always thought that things would get easier after vanilla, but that part of me forgot that Burning Crusade's design philosophy was pretty much exactly the same as vanilla. And in fact, I think it remains largely unchanged even through Wrath for the most part. I definitely don't expect that Northrend's 10 zones to Outland 7 will somehow be less dense, but even now my idiot brain seems to think that I can get the next chapter done faster. I know it's wrong, but I can't seem to stop deluding myself with preposterous levels of optimism.
See you all in 3 months.
I firmly wish to go faster with this series, and I guess that means I need to make some adjustments on how I script and design these videos. But that's my problem, not yours. For now, we rest. Grab a book or a beer and celebrate. The Lord of Outland has been slain. The Time Ways are safe from infinity. The Warlord of the Amani has vanished into the mists. The first Death Knight has finally met his true demise, and the last Lord of the Legion has been blocked from entering our world. Life is good. I'll get to work now on how the specter of death will soon be looming once more over our heads, but until then, Hargan.
Let them come. Frostmourne hungers.
We'll see you soon.